Welcome back to the Arise Exchange, right here on Arise News. Commodities. Where's Brent crude? What's happening in the Red Sea with the Houthis and the vessels and the U.S. coalition? Well, at 145 basis point drop for Brent crude at 82.46. North American grade, West Texas Intermediate, 77.31. So the supply inventory is also a story here in terms of oil prices. Natural gas is $1.62. RBOB gasoline, $2.29. $2.29. So that's on the energy side. I think we're going to go to precious metals now with the whole talk of, well, no, not precious metals. We're going to go to Uganda. The central bank presented the bank's financial system stability reports to the banking sector and the public. The financial regulator also used the presentation forum to answer key questions such as its preparedness for the new Basel regulations. Here it is.
The Companies Act was amended at the end of 2022, and regulations on ultimate beneficial ownership passed in January 2023. So the whole concept here, and this relates to our management, KYC, and the management of money laundering risk within the wider economy. The concept behind beneficial ownership is that every legal arrangement, it must be clearly identified who is the ultimate beneficial owner. In Uganda, within our Companies Act, the convention had always been that once someone was registered as a shareholder, the presumption was that the shareholder was the ultimate beneficial owner. What the regulations now require is that it's not enough for you to identify who the shareholders are. Even the ultimate beneficial owners must be indicated. This deals with the fact that sometimes there are legal arrangements where they are shareholders, but those shareholders are holding the shares in trust or on behalf of others. So that requirement came in, I believe, in January 2023. I believe the URSB did issue some kind of timeline to companies to comply with this legal requirement. In about August or July last year, a number of corporate legal arrangements and companies were actually struck off the company's register for non-compliance with this requirement and other requirements under the Companies Act. And in turn, what the financial institutions have done is they have restricted access to accounts of those companies or legal arrangements that do not fully comply, one, with the beneficial ownership, but also with the filing and reporting of returns by these legal entities. So when we talk about beneficial ownership in Uganda, largely it's about, one, it's an advancement on your standard KYC, that any legal arrangement, corporate entity, or legal person, the ultimate beneficial owner, those that ultimately stand to benefit from the activities from the activities and the business of that entity are known and listed. Now I'll turn to fraud incidents and the role of Bank of Uganda. In the presentation, I showed that there was a significant increase in fraud. There was an increase in the fraud incidents across the industry, not just within the payments ecosystem, but across the whole banking industry. And that's why in the risk categories, if you remember on operational risk, it was amber with an upward looking arrow. Amber is a little bit moderate, but increasing. The role of Bank of Uganda, and going back to what the Director Communications said, is about financial stability. Now let's take for a minute and pause and think about what really banking is about. Banking and the entities within the banking sector are largely in the business of selling trust. And fraud tends to erode trust. And to that extent, the fact that fraud erodes trust, Bank of Uganda is beholden to get involved in the management of fraud. One of the things Bank of Uganda is doing, and soon we shall provide cybersecurity guidelines to the financial institutions in terms of how the minimums we expect of them in terms of how they manage in particular cybersecurity fraud. Because we noticed that the majority of frauds are not necessarily, are largely out of the increased digitization. So as we increasingly go digital, it has its upsides, which is the ease and the speed at which we transact or conclude our transactions. Because that's done online, it means nefarious actors or those actors who have otherwise, not good intentions, tend to take advantage of persons that are not careful in the way they conduct their transactions online or through mobile banking. So the role of Bank of Uganda, one, is we get involved because fraud erodes trust. And the way we are doing it, one, we shall be issuing the industry with cybersecurity guidelines in terms of how they manage cybersecurity risk or fraud risk. Two, when financial institutions submit their internal capital adequacy assessments, I will require them to look at the various risk categories that they face as part of the operations, okay? And then the question then is asked, what, for that risk category, fraud risk, what mitigants do you have in place? And for any residual risk, what kind of capital are you holding in the event some of this fraud risk materializes? So it's a two-pronged approach. One, guidelines on how you manage fraud, and fraud, especially that from cybersecurity. But two, a discussion on how much capital you hold as a bank in the event that this risk materializes on your balance sheet. Third, I was asked to talk about the minimum paid-up capital requirements. So like I said earlier on, the statutory instrument was issued in December 2022. And as of June 2024, the Tier 1 banks are expected to have 150 billion shillings as paid-up capital. The Tier 2, the credit institutions, 25 billion. And the MDIs are 5 billion shillings. Now, for the institutions that have not yet met that requirement at this point, they have all submitted what are called capital restoration plans in accordance, I believe, with Section 82 of the FIA. What that does is that a bank gives a very clear timeline and plan in terms of how it intends to mobilize that capital and ensure its compliance with a fixed deadline, which in this case is June 2024.